Here we go. So tonight's talk is going to be interesting. I'm going to spit some truth, so buckle up. This talk is about a few different things that I've been kind of talking about and mulling over, and one of them, the idea behind this talk came from a few conversations that I've had with students regarding goals. So goals was the talk from a couple weeks ago, and every new year I discuss the importance of goals, the how-to, and some students love it. They're like, yes, they send me a list of 10 goals that they've made, and they're already doing them, and I make all the kids do it. It's their kung fu homework. And then some of the adults really love the goals, and some of the adults do not love the goals. And some of the adults know that they're just being lazy, and some of the adults come up with very convincing arguments for why they should not make goals. Some of those people are in this room, but some of them are like, well, I usually make lots of goals and I stress myself out, so my goal this year is to not make goals. I'm just going to let it ride and see what happens. And some of these people I know actually do stress themselves out and make a lot of goals and get a lot of stuff done, so it's okay. But then other people, I had a conversation with a Tai Chi student, and this student is actually great. I don't know very much about what he does outside the dojo, but I'm going to assume that he gets stuff done. But he says, I asked him, have you made your goals, sir? And he says, goals, it's kind of like a capitalist thing, setting goals and making goals. And I said, whoa, that is a new one. Nobody has ever made that excuse before to me, that it's a capitalist thing to do to make goals. And I totally get it. And then he immediately backtracked and said, well, of course, if your goal is about meditation or something internal like that, then it's not capitalist, so I guess I could do that. But it's really interesting, this conversation, because when a lot of people think goals, they think about getting stuff, or accomplishing or achieving something and getting to the next step. And on the one hand, of course, that's true. The purpose of a goal is to get you someplace beyond where you are now. It's also true that we need to accept where we are and recognize that if we're always unhappy with what we have and always seeking the next thing, we will continue to be unhappy, and that's going to be some of the meat of this talk. But I have talked in the past about this distinction between commitment and attachment, and this is similar to the idea that I'm going to speak about tonight. If attachment is, I set a goal, and my goal is I'm just going to use the most capitalist goal I can think of. My goal is to get a brand new Cadillac. It's got to be the year 2020, since we're already in 2019. It's got to be a 2020. It's got to be the top of the line, absolute best, fanciest Cadillac. And I get anything other than that. I get a 2019 Cadillac. I'm not happy. That's not what I wanted. I'm attached to the 2020. I got to be on the absolute highest end of this automobile, treadmill in life. And that is just not the way to go about it. If instead we say, I'm committed to enjoying myself on the road in Los Angeles. I don't need the 2020 Cadillac in order to enjoy my time on the road. I could have the same dumpy car that I've had for the last 10 years, but I could spend my time being more mindful of my breath, or I could flip on a book on tape that I enjoy, or do something that allows me to meet that goal, or to be in line with my commitment, even if it's not a very specific thing. And I think this is an incredibly important distinction to make for us, where if we get attached to a very specific goal and it's got to go the way that we want it to, or we are upset and therefore we give up on the whole thing, then we're left with nothing. And this is something that I talk about a lot with goals, is like the first thing that happens is, like my goal was to meditate every single day this year for an hour. I don't meditate, let's say that I meditate for 59 minutes one night instead of an hour. That's it. I blow up the whole goal. I didn't get exactly what I wanted, and so I just say, forget it. This year is ruined. I'll try again next year. That's basically just an excuse that you're making. So instead, I'm committed to deepening my relationship with myself or with the divine. I'm committed to, deepening my meditation practice. And even if I skip a day entirely, I just hop right back on it the next day. That's commitment versus attachment. And what this speaks to is the true nature of reality. Nothing short of that. The truest nature of reality, which is that we experience life and the world through this lens, through this duality. Our experience is that of the Matrix, which is all delusion. This is not reality, what we are experiencing here. It is, at the very least, a fuzzy lens that we're looking at. Even if you look at what science says, we can only understand or comprehend, certain dimensions out of all of the dimensions that actually exist. And we are only built to comprehend a few of these at a time, because if we actually were able to comprehend all of them, everything would be a big mess and we would be totally unable to live our lives. And that's great on some level. It's the way that it's supposed to be, so we have to kind of be okay with that. But to ignore that is to ignore reality, to think that what we are experiencing is the whole picture, and therefore to get really caught up in the whole thing, to get caught up with and attached to duality and whatever is next is to just live in delusion, and you're just completely, giving that delusion power over you. So it starts with recognizing that I don't need anything. I have it. I have exactly what I need in its entirety. Just, life and existence and the ability to breathe, and even less than that for some people is all you need. As soon as we think that this mortal shell is who we really are, and we start buying into, I need that new car, or I need to be in better shape, or I need this, or I need that relationship, or that job, or whatever it is, you're on a never-ending hedonic treadmill that there is no way to win that game. And I like thinking about life as a game, because it really is like a great metaphor for this kind of enlightenment or understanding, or like a paradigm shift. So I listened to this wonderful talk recently, and I forget the gentleman's name, but if you ask me about it later, I might be able to tell you. But he explained this in a way that I hadn't heard it explained before, that kind of flipped a switch for me. And it's basically this old concept that what we see here is not real, and what we think of ourselves is the ego. And when we are identifying as the ego, you can never be happy, because the ego always wants more. The ego always needs something else. Even if you are identifying as the ego that needs deeper spiritual enlightenment, that's still on some level, it's like the ego that wants. And by the way, it's almost impossible to get to a deeper spiritual place when you are identifying as the ego. So we do things on different levels that can kind of help us with this. On a fairly simple level, you look at desire. So when I have a desire, I know that is a function of my ego. I know that is a function of me living in the Matrix and buying into all of this. So I can kind of, just from a logical place, let it go. I can say, okay, I don't actually need that. That's not that is not the end of the world if I don't get it, and I know that because it's my ego, and it's fine if my ego doesn't get what it wants. I know that my ego is going to be upset, but if I am able to, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. If I am able to set the desire aside and live, even identifying as the ego, the act of setting aside the desire is in that moment allowing me to identify as something else, or at least to experience or live as something else. Because the desire no longer has power over me. The desire, which is really what speaks to the ego, therefore then the ego is not really in charge of me. So what's left is something else, something deeper. And this talk, he said, like, we sit and we meditate. And when we meditate, what we try to do oftentimes is get rid of the thoughts. And you've heard me say, getting rid of the thoughts is not really what we want. We want to just let go of the thoughts and just focus on the breath and go back to it. But he explained it in a way that I think is really great. He says, rather than thinking of you trying to get rid of or let go of the thoughts, you can just stop identifying as the ego, as the thing that's having the thoughts. And we think of the ego as a circular pattern of thoughts. The ego is this pattern of thoughts that just keeps going back, and it remembers things from our past, and it's got these attachments, and you have experienced this. You just keep thinking about the same stuff. And it might not be the same exact car, but I'm thinking about the car, or I'm thinking about the next car. And it might not be the same relationship with this person or the same job, but I'm continuing to circle back on these same things. And we're essentially trapped in this never-ending circle, this circular pattern of thoughts that is the ego. And when you sit and you meditate, if you are that circular pattern of thoughts trying to set aside itself, it's nearly impossible. So instead of trying to get rid of the thoughts, just stop identifying as the thing having the thoughts, which sounds really simple, and on some level it is really simple. Because when you're sitting and you're meditating and you have a thought, instead of saying, oh, I'm not supposed to have that thought, I better go back to the breath, I just recognize the thought and I see, okay, that thought is happening, but it's not me having the thought. That's my ego having the thought, and my ego can do whatever it wants because it's not me. And therefore, I don't have to stay attached to it. And I don't get in this kind of like frantic tug of war with trying to keep pulling my thoughts back. I just let them float away. And back to this idea of it being a game, like a video game. I play video games sometimes. Some of you have heard me talk about them. I play too much. But one of the things that has been really helpful for me recently is, my favorite type of video game is not the kind which is what they call a first-person shooter or a first-person like viewpoint where all you see is the screen and like you move around and it's just you, because that's too creepy for me. I like seeing the little guy or girl actually on the screen, like my little character running around and doing stuff. And it's cool because you get to see the way that the body moves, and it feels like actually more of an interaction for me than the other ones. But when you are playing that game, you know that you're not that little person running around on the screen. You experience it, and sometimes you experience it in a way that can really, you can really get attached to the outcome. And sometimes I'll sit there and I'll swear at the TV, like when it's a particularly hard thing. And then I'll remember, oh, that's not me, that's just a video. It's just like a little guy running around on the screen. It's okay. But we don't do that with our lives. With our lives, we are sure that we are this little person running around in the world trying to get stuff done. And when that little person doesn't accomplish their goals or get the whatever it is that they want, then that we see that as us, and we see that as like we're not getting what we want and what we need, and therefore we're unhappy. But I've been semi-successful in doing this over the last few days and weeks with meditation, and even sometimes in life. I'll see, wait a minute, this is happening, but that's not happening to me. That's happening to my little guy running around. That's happening to my little Sifu out there. So I go like this. I take myself out of this plane and I go, I go back. And then I see, oh, this is me running around, and I really care about this and I really care about that, and it's really cute. It's a game. It's not actually happening. It's not real. And when you do it in meditation, man, it's amazing. I'll sit there, and early on in my meditation now, instead of doing what I normally do, which is sit there and think about stuff and then remember it's time to meditate, and then I sit there and I keep going back to the breath, and it can be that tug of war. The first thing I do is I sit and I just go whomp back. And now this thing out here is having thoughts, and this thing out here is breathing, and this thing out here is his back hurts. He has an itch. But then there's me back here, and sometimes I can just sink further and further back into this, and all of this sensory stuff can happen, and it's okay. It's not something that I have to fight against. And that little paradigm shift for me has really made my meditations a lot more powerful and deep and smooth. And I like it because I get like a lot of bang for my buck with that simple intention of just stepping back. And it lasts for a while. And then I'll recognize, oh, I'm back to identifying with that little person trying to meditate, and I'm back to thinking, I'm back to trying to fight to go back to the breath or whatever, and then I just go whomp again. And then I can just see this, and this just floats away, and it can kind of become like a little TV screen, and it just goes like, and it just goes right out of my field of awareness. And then here I am just sitting in nothingness. And I had this concept of the true self being, what is beyond or inside or almost separate from the ego, as just being, I'm like a whisper in just complete and utter blackness or void. So I'm just like almost nothing, just like barely a whisper of something just floating around here. And that whisper of consciousness it loves to then attach to something and to be caught up in the ego and all of that. But then that whisper can just let that go and move on to whatever else is there. And it's just like witnessing all of this without having to live in it. So this is what I invite you guys to do in your meditation today, is just have like an out-of-body experience. It's as simple as that, and just let all of that go. And from that place, the more we practice being there, the more we practice being able to separate ourselves from the ego and stop identifying as that circular pattern of thought, then you recognize that your goals are really easy to, on one hand, to actually just accomplish in the first place. Because what I've seen is the part of me that is lazy, afraid, whatever, making excuses, to not actually do those things, I see that and I recognize that's my little video game person, that's my ego circular pattern of thoughts, that's not me. And so that thing can have those emotions or desires or attachments, but then I can still choose to act beyond that, from a place where it's not, I'm not bogged down by or limited by that. And that makes it a lot easier to achieve goals without all of those constraints. And I've had to really recognize this. Oftentimes I'll go into a conversation with somebody or some kind of an activity that I recognized this just a couple days ago. I have this understanding, I have this kind of this other place to stand in, yet I go into this conversation with somebody and I find myself dragged right back into that place because I'm used to being in that place with that person, or I'm used to being in that place with that activity, whatever it is. And so it's a constant reminder, wait, I got to step back and view this from a different place and let that all happen, and then be able to act in a way that I want to from that deeper place. And that's on the level of being able to get stuff done. The ego doesn't have to get stuff done. The ego can have its problems, and then we, the deeper thing beyond the ego, can still act no matter what. But then it's also really necessary to be able to be in a place of commitment versus attachment, and when things don't happen the way we want them to be able to move on. So the last thing that I'll leave you with is this concept that Sifu Brown gave me years and years ago, and he got it from umpteen other places. This is just truth, this is just wisdom, is we come into this world and we are having this experience, and we have a role to play. And it's like we are on stage. Think of it like the video game. This is like an entertainment. And you can choose to be entertained by it or not. And if you're up there, really attached to this person that's on stage, it's not as entertaining oftentimes because you're really freaking out all the time. But if you're able to step back and you see this is all super interesting and very entertaining, then you can enjoy it a little bit more. So I'm on stage and I have this role to play. And right now my role is Sifu. My role is to teach martial arts and to practice martial arts and to do all the things that I do as a Sifu. And I have to recognize that it's certainly possible that someday my role might change from Sifu. Maybe something happens and I'm unable to teach, and then I have to play this other role. And at some point it might become, I'm using myself as an example because we know that this is never going to happen, but it just becomes absolutely obvious that I'm not meant to do this anymore, and I'm meant to do something else. I'm meant to become president of the United States, and I have to set down being Sifu and just put on this new, president suit and walk around and play that role and play it without thinking like, man, I just wish I was Sifu again. I just have to, that is my role. And it is as real as it is, as real as any other role is. And then maybe my role is no longer to be president. I served out my 8 years, and now it's time to move on to something else. And now I don't know what's after that. I'm kayaking down the river in New Zealand, and I'm just a man on a kayak. That's it. That's all there is for me to do. And the thing is, we get so attached to this concept of who we are, or who we think we are, that we think that what we do or our experiences or whatever else is us. We think that is reality. But the truth is, it's just something that's happening over here that we are present for and we can experience without getting caught up in it, without getting attached to it. And to be able to then step back and recognize this is all fun and games. This is entertainment. This is something to pass the time before I move on to whatever is next. Whatever is beyond the ego. But I'll tell you this, it's way more entertaining and interesting if you set out to accomplish something and then work on accomplishing it, and then you can let it go when you need to and move on to the next thing. But if you are in this video game matrix and you are just that character over there, there are characters in video games that literally just like stand there and do this, or they just like walk around like this. You don't want to be that character. It's just not as exciting. I mean, you could wake up one day and find that that's your role. Your role is just to do this in a corner. And you do it. And you do it to the best of your ability. But as soon as we recognize that that is not actually us and we can choose to take that little person out there into whatever direction we want to, we no longer are so afraid to take the chances and to really try to accomplish the things that we set out to accomplish this year. So you can sit and meditate now and try to have the same experiences coming back and view those thoughts and view that experience and see it as something that is entertainment, something that is really there for you to witness, and see how that goes out into the rest of life and affects things. Sit comfortably.